Welcome to the Odd You. I'm your host, Beef Loaf. This show is being sponsored by our friends Punky's Pizza and Pasta, located at 2600 South Wallace, my personal favorite eatery in the neighborhood. They have the best selections of pizzas and pastas, as well as sandwiches and salads, any spot in Bridgeport. Currently, they have what they're calling the Pizza Happy Hour, Mondays and Tuesdays only. Between 4 p.m. and 9 p.m., you order a pizza from Punky's, and you get 50% off. Yes, you heard that correctly. 50% off pizzas ordered Mondays and Tuesdays between 4 p.m. and 9 p.m. How in the world can you get 50% off the best pizza in Bridgeport? The Pizza Happy Hour. Hit the website, punkyspizza.com, for all your carryout or delivery needs, or to cater your next party. You can also call 312-842-2100. The Scarlotta family will take care of you. Punky's Pizza and Pasta. This show is also powered by you, the loyal one-way supporter. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Feel free to tickle the undercarriage in the process. Like, comment, turn on notifications, and most definitely super chat, because it's how we get paid. It's how we continue to make the content you know and love. Tonight's guest. He is URM Analytics, a sports analytics site of his own creation, featuring his own projects and some of others. He's also the most difficult guest on this show to find a picture of on Al Gore's internet. Sean Sullivan, welcome to the Au Jus, my friend.
Hey, thanks for having me.
It's good to finally get you on here. I bet you're one of the guests from early on that I wanted to have. I wanted to find a great spot, and I think we found a great spot. I think you wrote something recently. But you also told me that you asked if it's okay if you drink with Unc Beef during the show. So I'm glad that you decided that you wanted to. I like when the guests drink with us.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure it was on brand. We've got Les Jus, which if anybody's been paying attention to the Chicago area craft brewery scene, Alarmus actually closed this past weekend. So you're interested in Les Jus on the Au Jus, then go to your local Binny's and make sure you get some, because it won't be around for long. So
wow. So this is just the end of it, huh? It kind of craft beer has gone through that. I mean, early on in the 108 days, we had Baderbrau as a sponsor, and they ended up, we claim we drank them into bankruptcy, which might partially be true, but there are kind of these ebbs and flows, and it is sad when some beers that you love just kind of go away forever and never to be seen again. It's tough.
It certainly is, and that's why I made sure to get a few before they're all gone.
I love it. So I want to talk about your website first. Did I say it right? URM, or is it URAM, or how do you pronounce it?
That's how I pronounce it. The technical pronunciation is probably a little bit different, but URM Analytics it's a lot easier to pronounce. So we go with that.
When did you start, and what is that all about, Sean? Tell me a little bit about it.
Yeah, so URM Analytics, it kind of has two areas of focus. The first is I tried creating a resource for aspiring sports analysts in such a way that would serve a purpose to help them along their journey. Because when I first started out, there really wasn't a consolidated place where you could find resources for data sets, what conferences are out there, what data contests are out there where you can participate and get your work in front of people, and then also a job board, a sports data related job board that I actively maintain. So I wanted to try to consolidate all of these things as best as I could for people. And then the second area of focus is more so what we're here to talk about today, which is showcasing some of my independent sports analytics research projects. Typically, they are baseball focused. I do have a couple football related things.
Nice.
But yeah, it's where I sort of get to flex some of the skill set that I've developed in school and at work, but apply it in a way that's way more interesting than what I do during the 9 to 5.
Yeah, right. Squeezing out efficiencies for a big corporate monster, different than doing the old sports through. I like that. Now, one thing that I really like, especially I was figuring through here, and we're going to talk specifically about an article, is like the process of thinking about how to go about something. I think as far as like, I watch a fair amount of sports content, and I don't think we break enough eggs in the process. There's not enough like, let's go down this path and brainstorm this thing, and it might not fucking work, or it might be, we didn't get there with it. I don't think there's enough of that. I think there's a lot of people who do kind of what we, with me and the boys do. They just take the safest route. They try to never be wrong about anything, and so I applaud. Let's get out there. Let's gamble, baby. I'm a gambler at heart. So I want to talk to you about the paper, Sean. So your article, From Stuff to Strategy, Improving MLB Pitch Profiles and Optimizing Usage. Great read for me. Broad strokes explain the thesis and then the methodology that you used here, because we will get into some White Sox pitchers that you break down a little bit. But I want to give an overview of the article for everybody, and I'd love for all the listeners to go read it after we're done.
Yeah, for sure. So hopefully they've got about 22 minutes because that's how long Wix says it takes to read. So I apologize in advance. But generally speaking, the reason I wanted to pursue this project was I'm on Twitter, much like yourself and many of the folks here, and specifically in baseball analytics Twitter, you often see people just kind of saying, "Hey, Shane Smith should throw this pitch," or "Shane Smith should tweak this," and oftentimes the why is lacking. There's really no why other than I think it could be good. So I was inspired by that, and I wanted to then take that sort of frustration and see, could I try to develop a data-driven framework that would allow for us to, at least within a ballpark, sort of put together an approach that could tell us if that suggestion is a good idea or not from the perspective of improving specific outcomes. So for example, if we want to say, hey, Shane Smith, you should tweak your slider, we'll then be able to say, we think you should tweak your slider because it improves the whiff rate and it also improves ground ball rate, which those are probably two things that pitchers and teams could and should care about.
Right.
So that's what I did. I created a framework that uses a data-driven approach to where you can take a pitcher, kind of go through a series of steps, and then at the end of it, hopefully you've got a pitch that you could focus on with some suggestions, and then you can go from there.
And in the article, it says a 22-minute read of the article, but if you want to go down the rabbit hole of a lot of the relevant work that you linked there is a lot of interesting stuff that kind of builds up into this. Now, what I kind of liked about this approach when I was reading through it, because I was like, oh yeah, you can always say do X, Y, Z, but you're right, the Y is never there. In fact, I'll be honest with you, until I would say 6 months ago, when someone says this pitcher does not have good pitch shape, I did not know what the fuck that exactly meant. And so you're right about the why not being filled in. It's like once you know the secret code of how to speak baseball, no one's ever going to fucking tell you what the real things mean. And so I really like the approach here. I also like your approach of kind of like trying to pick other pitchers to piggyback off of that, you know, there's at least some similarities in body type or motion or something that allows you to say, okay, this might be a possibility. Not just picking out of the clear blue sky. Oh yeah, it'd be great if this guy could execute this pitch well.
Right. So that's exactly what I tried to do. So the methodology that I lay out in the blog post is we start with picking a pitcher. So for Shane Smith, we want to identify pitches that we think he could improve. And I decided to base that evaluation on needing to improve their whiff rate. So I would look for pitches when splitting by handedness against batters, so right-handed batters or left-handed batters, for what pitches he had that were below the league average for whiff rate. And so in the example we'll talk about more later, it's his slider. So then with that pitch in hand, we need to find some candidates, right, for trying to improve his pitch. So what I wanted to do was base the suggestions off of real Major League Baseball players and their pitch profiles.
Right.
But like you said, you can't just throw anybody at the wall and see if it sticks.
Right. Some lefty side armor that weighs 150 pounds is going to look nothing. What he does is look nothing like what Shane Smith does. So
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I base that in what I'm sort of referring to as biomechanical reality. I won't go into too many details, but essentially I start off by filtering for pitchers that at least have a similar release profile, meaning that they have a similar extension. They release the ball from a similar position on a Y plane or on the X plane. So we're not, like you're saying, suggesting a submarine pitcher for somebody who has a more typical release.
Right. Yeah, and it's also matters for the nerds. It is a factor of tunneling, right? If that pitcher has been successful from the kind of the similar release point, well, this should all kind of like line up, especially if the repertoire is anything near Shane Smith's. He should be able to add it. Now, doesn't mean he'll be able to execute it, but just from a theoretical standpoint, right, Sean? It would fit with the profile.
Yeah, absolutely. And then once we filter pitchers out that way, we then also have to filter pitches for reasonable year-over-year changes, because you can't just increase your slider by 10 miles an hour, right? It has to be banded in some sense of reality. So by looking at what pitchers have tended to do historically on a year-over-year change in terms of like the speed, the spin rate, the way it moves horizontally and vertically, we then can use a second step of filtering to ensure that, one, we're starting with pitchers who reasonably kind of look like each other. And then two, we're filtering pitches that are reasonable changes on a year-over-year basis. Now, of course, there's a big caveat over not everybody's going to be able to replicate a pitch shape or replicate the speed and things like that. But again, this is about coming up with ideas and coming up with starting points.
Exactly. And so when you did dive down into Shane Smith, I'll put the graphic up right now, you came up with Carlos Vargas as the inspiration as you started to narrow down these pitchers. Explain the inspiration and then take us through the graph a little bit and what the thought process was to work on Shane Smith's slider.
Yeah, for sure. So kind of like I was saying, I started off by picking a pitch that was performing below league average for the specific pitch type with whiff rate. And his slider was below league average for, I believe, both lefties and righties, which made it a very easy pitch to want to improve. And he also throws it fairly frequently. Carlos Vargas was the one who made it through that two-step process, like I said. But Carlos Vargas wasn't the only one who made it through that process. We had guys like John Gray, Andre Palante, Shane Baz, etc. So all these different pitchers to consider. And then the next step would be, well, how do we know if this pitch profile of Carlos Vargas or John Gray, etc., offers a meaningful improvement over what Shane Smith does? And that's where some of the fancy machine learning and modeling comes into play. So what I did was I simply take the attributes of Carlos Vargas's pitch as well as some other variables that I use, which I can explain later if we want to get into that detail. And I just swap them in for Shane Smith's slider. So every time you see Shane Smith's slider, we're swapping in those variables of Carlos Vargas's slider. And then I have a model that's predicting whiffs as well as ground balls at a pitch level. And from there, we're then able to aggregate and compare. So we're able to compare what the model thought Shane Smith's slider would look like normally, and then what Shane Smith's profile would look like with Carlos Vargas's slider or with John Gray's slider or with whomever else's slider. And then we're able to compare and see if there is a meaningful improvement. And by that, I mean, does Vargas's slider offer a lift, so a higher whiff rate or a higher ground ball rate compared to what Smith's predicted rates would be for his actual slider? So we're able to swap in anybody else that sort of passes through this multi-step filtering process and see how that pitch profile would perform for that pitcher. And one point I'll offer to, I know I sort of alluded to it before, but we're not looking at the pitch attributes in a vacuum. We're also trying to take an approach that's a little bit more considerate of the arsenal and the sequencing of the pitches that Shane Smith already has. So to do that, we're taking the actual pitch profile, like I mentioned, of Carlos Vargas, but then we're comparing these attributes such as velocity, spin rate, spin axis, horizontal and vertical movement, and we're comparing it to the primary pitch that Shane Smith has, so like his four-seam fastball, and then we're comparing it to the previous pitch thrown in a plate appearance. So we're doing all these things to try to sort of capture how this pitch plays on its own, how it plays in relation to what he typically throws, and how it plays in relation to the pitches that he's thrown in this plate appearance sequence. So I know I'm going down the rabbit hole. So
no, I love it. And actually, now I want to bring up the next graph too, which is the analysis that you do of what pitch mix he kind of defaulted to last season versus what might be a more optimal pitch mix. And I'm going to put that up on the board right now. And you can see the graphs on the one side is versus left-handed batters and the other side is versus right-handed batters. Obviously a very important bifurcation here is right-handed pitchers will be pitching differently to the different sides of the plate. And so what did you find when you ran the analysis for the suggested pitch mix post giving him Carlos Vargas' slider?
Yeah, so as you can see, there are some deviations from what he actually did. And a lot of that goes, I think there's a lot that goes into the differences that you see comparing what they actually did to what this process suggests that they should do. And I'll offer a little caveat that this is merely a suggestion that exists in this hypothetical simulation world that I built out, right? And then in actuality, perhaps it doesn't work. But to me, this offers a different perspective as to how pitchers could go about deploying the pitches that they have and so on and so forth.
Right.
And I'll sort of take this opportunity to jump into two pieces of work that really inspired what I did. And I mentioned them early on in the blog post. So Stephen Sutton Brown from Baseball Prospectus, and then a handful of guys from Driveline Baseball. They independently did research projects trying to quantify what makes an arsenal, right? So like, how do we
Right.
know that all these pitches that Shane Smith has, that they work well together, that they're allowing for the success of Shane Smith to occur, or some struggles to occur? And they introduce, both of them more or less introduce similar ideas. And there's sort of two buckets of thought here that they're offering in terms of arsenals, and then I'll tie it together here with what we're seeing to make a little bit more sense and give a practical example.
Love it.
But they bring up the concept of mixing, which would be having pitches that have different movement profiles and velocities than each other, right? So you're not just throwing three different variants of the same sort of fastball in the same sort of movement profile. You've got a little bit of variance, and you're sort of moving around those pitch profile graphics that you'll see on Baseball Savant. And then the second one would be matching. So that, again, similar to what you mentioned before with tunneling, they introduced the concept of you want pitches to look like each other as long as possible in flight to the batter, right? So that it's difficult to tell what's going on. So then if you've got pitches that are able to mimic each other very far along in flight and then move differently, then that is very advantageous for the pitcher and becomes very difficult for the batters to even guess what's coming their way.
Right. Even if they're kind of on it, they're not on it necessarily, because they got to make a 50-50 or 33% guess as they're in the middle of a swing decision. Yeah, it'd be very difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where, tying this back into what we see here, these plots, I think, do a good job of playing into the concepts that those two groups talk about. And good example would be if you were looking at Shane Smith's movement plot on Baseball Savant, I think this would start to make a little bit more sense, where if we look at the four-seam fastball and the sinker, they sort of operate in a similar area of the movement profile plot, meaning they probably look, and on top of that, they have very similar velocities. I believe they are basically the same, actually, according to Baseball Savant from last year, both at 95.7 miles an hour. So you have pitches that look like each other and are moving at the same rate of speed, but then slightly deviate a little bit. So you would think that playing into your four-seam fastball and your sinker a little bit off of each other could help. And what's interesting with the idea of the slider being sort of suggested to be used more, especially against right-handed pitchers, is that I think it leans into that mix element that, again, Sutton Brown and Driveline bring up, where you're stretching that movement profile and you're forcing batters to account for a different speed, a different movement, and that causes a little bit more trouble. And then especially if you also look at the mix against the lefties with working in the sweeper, which he really didn't throw very often.
Right. I was going to say, for people looking at the graph on the screen, the circles that are blank are what he actually threw. Yes. And then the colored circles are the suggested amount. So you could see the sweeper up to 15% against left-handed batters when he nominally threw it. I mean, maybe he threw it 10 times all year or whatever. It doesn't look like much.
I think it was less, but that's where this process sort of leaves what actually happened behind and says, what if we sort of reimagine this and see what comes out of this? And the way that I've landed on these percentages was this mix actually outperformed what he actually did within my modeling process. So that's how this ended up here. If, like we'll get to later, if somebody has a pitch mix that does not outperform what they actually did, then there's no suggestion. And we say you've probably landed in a pretty good spot with how you're deploying.
Yeah, I look forward to talking about that guy later in the discussion. One thing I wanted to point out here, maybe it's 2 points here necessarily, Sean, is like when you're looking at the graph, the most obvious thing to me is not so much like an increase in slider usage, although there is a decent sized one both against both handedness, but it's the substantial decrease in the four seam fastball. And now Shane Smith, his best pitch was a four seam fastball, and he leaned on it a very lot. So I guess my question here is, Sean, how much of this is just like comfortability for a particular pitcher of like, I know that pitch is working today. I've got that one in my bag today, and so I'm going to lean on this one more. Or how much of it is sometimes like I look at the graphs here for pitch mix, suggested pitch mix, and to me it reminds me of like game theory optimal poker. And now game theory optimal poker is good when you're against world-class athletes, but if you're against some very poor players, you will want to deviate from that and play a more exploitive type of game. And so where does that land with regards to like an average pitcher's pitch mix? Do you think it's a lot more like just leaning on the thing they know they can trust, or are they seeing something individually out there specifically that that's why they're choosing to go back to the well so much?
As a non-former Major League Baseball player, I can certainly speak to this with full confidence. But I imagine it's a little bit of it all, right?
Yeah, right.
Guys are going to go with what they're comfortable with. And ideally or hypothetically, the team also has like a game plan, right, on how they want to attack certain batters. And maybe that sort of deviates from what you want to do or what you should do the most. But I would offer that, to me, this work here with suggesting optimal mixes is meant to sort of challenge the status quo. Now, maybe someone with the Sox is like, Sean, this is totally terrible. I totally disagree. Shane Smith would poo-poo it. I don't know. But at least it's something different that's sort of bringing up, well, maybe I could use the slider a little bit more. Or maybe I should use the fastball a little bit less. I don't know. I mean, to me, it's worth at least thinking about how you could go about deploying your arsenal a little bit differently than what you've typically done. And of course, Shane Smith had a great year, no doubt about it. But going into year 2, guess who's going to be all keyed up on your historical usage and what you've done in the past and what you want to do? Every team in Major League Baseball. So maybe it's okay to sort of deviate a little bit and see what works.
I absolutely love it. All right, let's jump to the next guy, Davis Martin. Where do we go with Davis Martin? Davis Martin's, he's the longest tenured White Sox is what I heard this weekend at Sox Fest, which was like, holy shit, really? That guy's like 28 years old, but he's been here longer than everyone else. He pitched on that 2022 team. He actually was decent down the stretch. He got hurt in the very last game of the season and missed the year, but he's locked into a rotation spot. I would be shocking if he wasn't. And he was okay last year. I as much as I would say Shane Smith had a good year, I would say Davis Martin had an okay year.
Yeah.
What pitch are you looking at? What kind of improvements are you looking here for Davis Martin?
Yeah, I was a little disappointed. I wasn't invited to the ranch. I probably could have given them some ideas. And
I love it.
I'm helpful around the house and with cooking and things like that. So I'm useful on a ranch. But
beautiful.
Davis Martin actually deviates a little bit from what I was trying to do. If you're in the blog post and checking out later on, you'll see that the pitch I suggest for Davis Martin actually does not lead or potentially lead to an increase in whiff rate. Because again, what I'm trying to do is find pitch profiles that would lead to an increase in their whiff rate for that given pitch.
Right.
Part of the problem with Davis Martin was that with this specific pitch, the changeup, which again was selected because it was below league average and used pretty regularly by Davis Martin, was that there weren't a lot of candidates that made it past those two sort of filtering points. So guys with similar release profiles and then those pitch profiles being too big of a change, which left us only a handful. So then
now, Sean, why was that? I've heard weird things about him. Like he can't throw a regular changeup, right? He throws like the kick, what they call the kick changeup or whatever. So it's kind of a different grip and everything. Is it because not a lot of guys who are like him even throw changeups at all?
I'd have to double check because to be honest with you, I don't remember if the largest sort of filtering came from the release profile versus the pitch profile itself.
Okay.
But that could certainly play a role with, the specific profile of the pitch. So like you're saying, the movement, the speed, the spin, primarily. If those rates
Uncle
are
Ted's saying pronators. Yeah, that's I don't know the terminology specifically, but I knew that there was something with this changeup. So
yeah, so that of course could play a role. But to kind of get back to Davis Martin, I ended up suggesting using Huascar Brazoban's changeup. And the reason why I went with that versus some of the other guys, like Reese Olson his profile actually suggests that there would be a lift in whiff rate for the changeup. But when comparing the lift in whiff to the guardrail metric that I set up, and I think I kind of skipped that part, I not only was looking at whiff rate, but also ground ball rate, just to make sure that we're not jacking one up too much and screwing with one.
You don't want to turn into like he gives up 1 million home runs. So you want to margin of safety. I like that. There's nothing wrong with that.
Again, I've been crafted by the corporate world. I've got my guardrail metrics. I'm ready to rock and roll. Right. But when you compare like sort of like a net of the overall lift for the whiff and the lift for the ground ball rate, you'll see that Brazelman's was actually positive. He's gaining enough ground ball rate to sort of offset that whiff rate. So that's why I suggested going with Brazelman's changeup.
And when I pull up the pitch mix here, this is for Davis Martin's pitch mix. It's kind of interesting. I didn't realize that he was already using his changeup that much against lefties, which it looks like a substantial amount. Now this graph here on the one side is saying, bump that up a little bit. But what's kind of funny to me is it's saying like, that four-seam fastball you throw, just put that in your pocket against a lefty. We don't need to see that hardly at all. That was interesting to me, is almost like, kind of pitch backwards or be a junk baller against lefties is your best strategy for Davis Martin. Is that what this is kind of telling you too, Sean? Is just like change up to death and then mix in that slider and sinker?
I think this kind of goes back to what I was talking about with the idea of matching. I think if you were to look at Martin's pitch profile chart on Baseball Savant, which again, I'll keep plugging Baseball Savant as well as Fangraphs, great resources. The sinker and the changeup sort of, again, operate in a similar space. Now, of course, their speeds are quite a bit different. The sinker's at like 92 miles an hour. The changeup is slightly slower, around 90 miles an hour. So I feel like those would play well off of each other. And then stretching against a lefty, it would be going into a lefty, bumping up that slider usage, and then also offering a little bit less on the cutter, but sort of trying to get a little bit more of, a more broad usage so that you're not just keying in on changeup and fastball, which again are sort of operating in a similar movement profile space. So by mixing it up a little bit more, and again, if you look at everything besides the changeup, they're all basically in the same range from like 9% to 14%. So I think that also would play a strong role in keeping batters on their heels. If it's not a changeup, it could be anything else. And that could be pretty difficult, especially if he's able to match those pitches in flight to make sure they look pretty similar to each other.
Yeah, I love that, because it's almost like you're leading with the changeup, and then I might throw you anything here, and you kind of don't know. So there is an game theory optimalness to that. I really like that approach, and it does sort of show you like Davis Martin is a guy who touts a lot of pitches, and feels like he's one of those like old school kitchen sink guys, junk ballers who can kind of get up there and do everything. So I wouldn't mind seeing him take some notes from this. Now the next guy up on the list, he's probably the starting pitcher I think has the most upside. Actually, before we get to them, let's get to this drink. My guy English Sox Colin left us a super chat. He says bedtime, looking forward to full nerd listening tomorrow. Thank you, Colin. Colin's in the UK. He's been on the show before, but he was looking really forward to this. He reached out to me. He's like, it's gonna be a good one, so he's gonna be listening, I'm sure, at work tomorrow. Thank you.
All right, good. I hope you enjoy, Colin.
Yeah, the guy who I think has most upside and who I was like excited to see who you're going to work on here is Sean Burke. And man, it was such a stunner to see the comparison for Sean Burke be Shohei Ohtani. Tell me about that, Sean. How did you end up filtering? How'd you end up filtering slider for slider here with these boys?
Oh, just for the clicks. That's the only reason. This was bait to get on the podcast. No, but on a serious note, I was overjoyed that Shohei Ohtani, one, made it through those two filtering steps, and then two, had clearly the sort of best net outcome of looking at the counterfactual of his slider when looking at whiff and ground ball rate. For whiff rate, it's suggesting a couple point increase. And then for ground ball rate, it's quite a high suggested lift of 10 percentage points. Now,
Oh, wow.
I don't necessarily think that's legitimate. I think a lot of this should be thought of directionally. So not saying, oh, if he would do
Sure.
Otani's slider, it'd be for sure a 10 percentage point increase. No, it probably.
But at 10%, you probably have more confidence that there is something there, and it would definitely make a difference.
Yes, I think so. And I think, again, if by leaning on the movement plots that you see up on Baseball Savant, it would start to make sense. Also, when looking through the lens of what we've been talking about with the Arsenal approach that Baseball Prospectus and the Driveline guys have championed, that it plays, I think, a good role within an arsenal, and by tweaking the profile, primarily by having less, by really tweaking the induced vertical break to having drop instead of rise, and then taking a little bit of horizontal movement off of what Burke already does. So kind of making it a little tighter and a little less, having less rise, like I said.
Yep.
I think it offers a really good bridge pitch between his fastball offering and some of his other pitches that sort of exist up on the top right-hand side of the movement profile with his curveball. So I think that, and that's a concept that those guys bring up, this concept of a bridge pitch. And I think it could play a good role. And with that movement and the less induced vertical break that it would have compared to his normal pitch,
Yep.
I think batters would be swinging over the top of it and generating more ground balls. Because generally speaking, if I'm not mistaken, like the less induced vertical break, batters are going to have a harder time squaring that up, at least with not producing ground balls, right? They're going to kind of go over the top.
They're going to top the ball. Like we were last 108 podcast, we were talking about Luis Angel Acuna and how much he's been topping the ball or was topping the ball last year, and how it's probably something that they're going to have to work on in his hitting profile. And you're right. If this kind of lines up for getting the hitters right on top of that thing, chopping that thing into the ground when they're expecting the four seamer, it's interesting and I mean, that would be humongous for him, because if he got confident throwing that and throwing it as a strike, I mean, you'd have to think that like having all these extra ground balls would help him suppress that walk rate, which has like kind of been a big problem for him. If he feels comfortable, I gotta pitch that as an antidote to these big power hitters. I'm gonna give him this, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's worth a shot, right? Because if you can extend your sort of lifeline within a game and buy Venable more time before having to go into his newly revamped bullpen, then that's probably a good thing. And it just works out for him professionally. Like, you stick around more, you have more favorable outcomes. That's a good thing for us. It's a good thing for you.
Yeah, exactly. I have more bullets in that arm. That's I love it. I love that approach. I love talking through that. Now, the one guy on here, and I don't have any graphs for him, but you did the analysis on Mike Vassell, and what was interesting to me is that basically his pitch mix that he was using was close enough to optimal that there wasn't a big matrix to kind of show like, oh, he should do all these changes. Do you think like that's some of the key to success? Because there were a lot of naysayers because the FIP was a little higher, and you know, like he seemed to get a little bit lucky on batted ball. If you know the ARA was trailing lower. So do you think like maybe that's some of the secret sauce to Mike Vassell? He's comfortable throwing any of his pitches in any kind.
You know, I do think so, but I also think that there is a little bit to his arsenal and aiding him with the success that he had. Because I guess as a review, right, his ERA was what, like 2.50. His FIP was like 4.3.
Right.
So a
big disconnect.
Huge difference. And I sort of dug into that because I was trying to figure out, I'm like, well, how did he have that big of a difference? And it seems like, as best as I could tell from like 5 minutes on Fangraphs and Baseball Savant, that's really coming from his left on base rate, which is at 83.1. According to Fangraphs, that's elite. So it's like, okay, that's pretty sweet. So how is he doing that?
Right.
He's doing that by having an 85th percentile ground ball rate and a 68th percentile hard hit rate. So he's getting by with putting guys on base by generating ground balls, and he's not giving up hard contact. And I think his arsenal plays into that.
And it makes sense because I can remember many times where there's a bunch of people on base. He throws the much needed ground ball for the double play. And it's like, all right, wow, we couldn't, you know, we really could use that right now. And he got it done.
Yeah. And I'll admit, in a dream world, I would love to see him not have to rely on that as much, of course,
right.
But perhaps he doesn't quite have the stuff to get by with just pure stuff. And he has to continue to be crafty in this way. But I do think his arsenal plays a good role in that. And that leans again into that mix usage. I think that uh, for looking specifically at his ground ball rates with specific pitches against handedness, his sweeper was like 13 points above league average by generating ground balls. And then for against lefties, the sinker and changeup combo were doing pretty well compared to league average, which then got my sort of wheels turning again with how does this play together from an arsenal perspective? What's going on with the pitch movement plot? And I think against lefties, the four seam and sinker are doing a really nice job from a match perspective. They're looking like each other, but they're differing in space. And with the sinker, they're swinging over the top, they're hitting ground balls. Yep. And with the sweeper, I was a little stuck on this, but according to Baseball Savant, his sweeper has more drop compared to similar pitch profiles. So similar to what we were talking about with Sean Burke, I think that it's also inducing more ground balls because it's dropping more than expected than what batters are used to normally seeing against sweepers. So again, guys are swinging over the top of it, generating ground balls. So I think that may be part of what's working so well for him is that he's playing well against against lefties with that fastball sinker play. The sinker's getting the grounders, and then that sweeper is dropping more than what batters are used to, and that's getting them to swing over the top. So hey, if it's working, don't if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right?
I love it. I love hearing that. Now, this was not in the paper, but as we were DMing, we were talking to each other. I said, Sean, I'm hearing all this rumors that the White Sox, they signed Sean Newcomb, who looks like a nice reliever, who's been around, but they want to kind of have him start. Can you run Sean Newcomb, and would you let him start after you run what you run and see like what pitch you would fix? Because he was a starter years ago. I think the last time he was a full-time starter was maybe 2018 or whatever. It's been a minute, and they're claiming they're running back. So what did you find out? What do you think about Sean Newcomb as a starting pitcher?
I say why not? I'll sort of throw that out there and then get into the breakdown that we did. I say why not? The Sox are at a point where this is the type of thing they can do, right? Where they can try out some guys and who've had some success in the past, maybe coming off a good year, and they want to try their hand at being a starting pitcher. Well, hey, you can come here and do it, and then if it doesn't work, they could be a plus arm out of the pen. Like, sure, why not? Yeah. But getting into the sort of diagnostic process that we did, Sean Newcomb, unfortunately, because of his fairly unique delivery, didn't lead to many candidates making it through the filtering process. It only resulted in two. Now, of course, there were a bunch of pitches to consider. He had several pitches that were below league average from a whiff perspective. But I picked on a sinker, which was about 13 points below league average against righties, and it's something that he throws pretty often. So that's why I picked on his sinker. Not many guys, like I said, made it through the filtering process. Only two, including old friend, retired old man, Fraser Ellard. So sorry to see you go. But
not that old, but retired is right.
Well, now he's old because he's retired. That's how that works.
It's like, oh, this guy's retired? He's in his 20s.
Yeah. So I got a kick out of him popping up. But Brooks Raley, his sinker was the one that showed up and made it through the whole evaluation process, is showing a lift in whiff of about 5 points. So, and then comparing that to his actual sinker, it's a little bit slower. It's got a little less rise. So again, a little bit more drop and more arm side movement. And so to me, I'm like, well, why not? If you could squeeze a few points out of whiffs with your sinker, which again is a good pairing typically with the four seam fastball and changeup, then it's a good pitch. And especially, again, continuing to lean on the baseball perspectives and driveline guys. They really talked about how, I think Baseball Perspective, Steven Sutton Brown was talking about how the mixing of these pitches and, of course, the different movement and velocity profiles, if you're doing that enough and not just throwing, 75% four seam and 25% changeups, you're giving yourself a little bit more lifeline on these batters not getting used to what you're throwing. So if I'm not mistaken, Newcomb has a pretty good arsenal. Of course, the usage could be tweaked a little bit, but he should lean on that and continue to try to diversify his portfolio and his repertoire to squeeze out a little bit more. Again, get into the fifth inning, get into the sixth inning. Let's not rely on the bullpen unless we really need to. So I'm with it. I'm glad that they're giving him a shot. I think he's got a good shot to be successful. So I'm excited to see what he does.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, why not? And if it doesn't work, obviously, you have a guy who has worked in the bullpen. Sean, one of the things that I learned from this, I think, as someone who's watched for a long time, tries to analyze the White Sox the best I can or whatever, is like you always hear he really needs to develop a third pitch in order to be a starting pitcher. And you realize it on a real high level that you get to face these batters multiple times. But the discussion about the pitch mixes makes you realize, yeah, and possibly a fourth and fifth pitch if you can at least get by on some of these, like just to mix up the looks, mix up the line up the tunneling, how the thing looks coming out of your hand. So very, very interesting stuff. All of you, there is a link to this article in the YouTube and also in the podcast, so go check that stuff out. You're not leaving yet, Sean. It's a little more White Sox to talk about here, my friend. The White Sox recently brought in a bunch of pitchers that have command concerns of varying levels. Seranthony Dominguez, who I think is probably going to be lining up to be their closer. Jordan Hicks, who I'm not sure if they won't have cut by June just because they were eating his salary and they wanted to get prospect David Sandlin in. After doing this research, do you expect part of them corralling their command to be adjusting their pitch mix to things that they can throw over the plate or can be more successful?
Yeah, that's a really good question. To be honest with you, I didn't necessarily approach this from a command perspective, so I don't think I can speak super intelligently on that from that perspective. But I did think a little bit about this, of course, and I think that it really comes down to probably changing their approach a little bit. Like I was looking at Seranthony Dominguez, and I saw that his first pitch strike rate was about 7 points below league average. So to me, it's like, why not try to pepper the zone early on? Try to get that first strike. So
quit nibbling. Throw it in there.
Throw it in there. Because I was looking at his location plots with the sweeper and split finger. And I understand, right? You're trying to throw those out of the zone, trying to get them to chase, etc. But some of these, like where these concentrations were on the pitch plot, were well out of the zone.
Okay, I not even competitive necessarily.
Seemingly not. So to me, it's be aggressive, get at first strike, and don't necessarily try to nibble if you don't need to. If you're in a count where you can, then sure. Now, of course, Dominguez kind of gets to live on the edge a little bit because he has that elite velocity. And I meant to write down his ground ball rate. I forget if he's good at generating ground balls or not. But this
is a White Sox bullpen that has been starved for velocity. I mean, when Grant Taylor came up, we were like, wow, we finally have one of them guys up here.
No, it is much needed. So to see that with Dominguez and then Hicks, Leisure's got some pretty good pop, obviously Taylor. So like that is fantastic. And one other thing that's not necessarily specifically what you're talking about or asking about is I'd really like to see Venable try to play matchups perhaps a little bit more obviously from my perspective or others' perspectives. And
explain like what like how exactly, not just right left. You're saying you're saying play matchups specific to strengths of the opposing hitters.
So like I guess take a step back. I'd really like for them to not be so stuck in Dominguez as a closer and Hicks is a setup guy, and this and the other. Like if Dominguez doesn't have it and he's missing everything, and this is high leverage and he just doesn't have it, then okay, pull him. Get somebody else in there who looks good with this upcoming sequence of batters, who will generate a strikeout, who will generate a ground ball, and go from there. That's kind of what I was trying to get at, is being a little less stuck in, he is my closer, we're riding or dying. And of course I get it. He's the free agent. He's making a bunch of money. That's what they're going to do. But
I assume part of it, at least part of signing him, was to like reduce decision fatigue for Venable. Considering last year's bullpen was a lot of mix and match, trying to figure out what was going on. But I agree with you. Like he was comfortable trying stuff. It seemed like it didn't seem to work very often, but he was comfortable trying stuff. I hope that he doesn't lose that comfort when Dominguez is like etched in as the back guy there.
I would argue he's got even more fun at his hands, right? Dominguez,
better weapons,
Taylor, Vassell, etc. Like so many like fun options where they can really do some interesting things.
I love it. Sean, there's been a lot made of. We had Jeff Passan on this show a couple weeks ago on the 108 podcast. He said the White Sox were having a good offseason. He even then tweeted it, and it caused a lot of things. A lot of national guys are saying the White Sox are having a good offseason. Some of my hardcore, crusty White Sox fans that I know, like Herb Lawrence and White Sox Dave and other people are like Patrick Nolan, that they're not having a good offseason. They totally disagree. Where are you at, Sean, on their offseason? It's not complete yet. I think they may make one or two more moves, but they've made a lot of moves thus far. What do you think they're at here?
This is a tough one. I guess maybe this is kind of a lame out, but I look at it through two different perspectives. One would be, if I wasn't a White Sox fan and understood, or at least think I understand the parameters that Getz and his front office are sort of operating in, not because of their own decision making, but because of leadership, like ownership, etc., then yeah, the offseason is probably looking a little worse, like a C minus. But understanding, again, from a fan's perspective, that it seems like they don't have a lot of money that they can go and spend. They didn't really have a whole lot of talent to trade off, which they probably really shouldn't trade off anybody else that I could think of off the top of my head. That's clearly obvious, like Luis Robert was.
Right.
So to me, within the constraints that they've had, I viewed a little bit more positively. Okay. I would give it like a B or a B plus. They've gone out, they've improved the bullpen. The outfield is still suspect, but at least you have something kind of decent going on, and then you're giving some flyers to some former top prospects, and maybe we'll see what kind of shakes out. And again, I think the Sox could and should be doing things like that, similar to the trade with Hicks and Sandlin, where you're taking on money to then get a prospect who's pretty intriguing. So to me, within, again, those what they've been sort of stuck with how they can operate, I'd give them like a B or a B plus.
I like the context of both, Sean, because you're right. Dealing from where they're dealing. I also think of it from the perspective of, I hear a lot of, they should just be competing. It's like, you're not taking into account how bad of shape everything was left in when the last two, when Hahn and Williams left, and how everything needed to be like ground up, redone. I mean, they're still building their Dominican Academy. They haven't even had a real class that's not Marco Patti's in the international. And then you're 6 years from those people being in the majors who are going to be coming from the kind of the new groups class. Like I maybe I'm giving them too much grace, but it looks so decayed that I was like, I'm going to give them a little more time. I'm going to look at this a little more agnostically. And so I'm probably in the boat you are. And then it's funny in the comments, Alex Rude goes, Beef's going to ask every guest this question until opening day. I do that every Auju offseason. I'll always have one question I want to ask all the guests, and so I can get like a consensus of what people think. And you and Alex were kind of in the same ballpark. As your thoughts on this is like a B plus, kind of a decent offseason, but not an over the moon kind of thing. So I really like that. So one last thing here, Sean. Explain the White Sox Twitter lineup simulation contest to the people.
Oh, I would love to. So it's where you prove that you are the smartest fan on all of White Sox Twitter.
Yes.
So for those who are not familiar, I've been running this Twitter contest. This will be the 8th year. And the idea is simple. You submit your ideal opening day lineup, of course, limited to who is on the actual roster.
Yep.
And then I do a bunch of crazy hoodoo voodoo magic. And I create a list that gives you all of the lineups that were submitted, ranked based on the number of runs that would be expected to be scored. And then winners typically, at least historically, have gotten gift cards to More Than Dogs. I'm hoping that they'll participate again this year. But it's a really fun opportunity, I think, for fans to kind of give their go at pretending to be Will Venable and submitting a lineup. And then, of course, seeing how it stacks up with your favorite Twitter guys like Beef Loaf, or we got a bunch of people like Sox Machine, Herb Lawrence does it, Sean Anderson, so and others I can't think of.
I was going to say, I think a lot of Sox Twitter does participate, so you can really see like, hey, how do I think about the lineup compared to everybody else? And we'll be retweeting it, Sean, just so that we try to get some people in there, get a good group, and then it's bragging rights from there. If you end up behind somebody, then you got some problems. Otherwise, if you're ahead of them, good. I know more than that person. It's a good place to start, even outside of the gift cards. In my personal opinion, it is bragging rights.
And I'm blanking. There's a guy from Fort Wayne, and that's part of his handle, and he makes top 5 like every year. I am blanking on his name, but someone's gotta beat him. He's always right there.
Got to build some better optimal lineups on them. So, well, thanks, Sean. We'll push that out there. Looking forward to that. That usually comes out in March, if I remember correctly, right? It's kind of like mid-March.
Yeah, right before opening day, and unfortunately, right during your guys' 108 tournament. So it's
perfect. That's a perfect time, though. A lot of people are out on Twitter causing hijinks. It's perfect time to make yourself a goddamn lineup and see where you can stack up with them.
Yeah, you lose, submit a lineup. There we go.
That's right, exactly. Well, thanks for discussing Shane Smith, Davis Martin, Sean Burke, and the White Sox Twitter lineup a simulation contest. Remember, we ain't trying to be right on the show. We're just trying to understand. Anything you want to plug before you go, Sean?
Yeah, two things. One, do the White Sox lineup Twitter. Two being, we also have, through like my Year Analytics work, not just me, but some others that are local in the sports analytics community, we have a Chicago area sports analytics group meetup. About 3 to 4 times a year. We meet at a bar and we just kind of nerd out. We get a lot of people who do this professionally, do it for fun, do it just to get on the Azure podcast like me. And everyone gets together and nerds out. So it's a really great opportunity to network and, just kind of talk shop with some people. So I just want to plug that. If you're interested, please shoot me a DM. We can get you on our email list.
Awesome. Yeah, that sounds good. Sean, thanks so much for doing this, man. I've been too long not having you. We'll have to get you back on sometime during the season and check in on how some of these guys are doing, if they made any improvements with themselves.
No, I really appreciate the time and opportunity to come on here and talk about it. Thank you.
You got it, my friend. Take care, brother. That was Sean Sullivan. That was great, man. I've been so looking forward to that fucking conversation. Next week's guest, this is funny. Scheduling conflict. I was going to have Chris Gonzo from the Blackout Show. He's the host of the Blackout Show with Ozzie Guillen and my guy Justin and Slavko and all those guys. But we got the dates screwed up. So he's going to be coming on in March. So I don't know who the hell is going to be on here next week, but we'll have someone on here. There's been a lot of chatter on Twitter. So maybe I'll get one of you goofs to come on here and just yell at me how I think the Sox offseason's better than other people. Thanks to Punky's Pizza and Pasta and all the 108 families up in the YouTube comments. Appreciate you smashing the like button. Comment, and of course, drinks and tips. We'll see you on Thursday for the 108 podcast.